Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, 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 this time power, this time to build power, this time to build power, this time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton.
And this is Nate Drolet.
And this is our first recording of 2024. So happy 2024. Happy New Year to everybody out there. The end of 2023 was a nightmare for me. December was a wash of sickness and closed daycare and trying to play catch up and then just getting further and further behind. So I'm glad January is here. How about you?
Same. I feel like you're in good company in that. Like, I had so many clients who were like, man, I really want to start up in December or January. And I feel like 90% of people, everyone's just like, oh, I have no clue what happened between like Thanksgiving and New Year's. It's like everything was chaos. I was like, well, I think it's that time of year. Like, yeah, just absolute chaos. I had like kind of a similar thing. Actually, I think I climbed 4 days between Thanksgiving and New Year. Like, started snowing right as Thanksgiving week started. And I had like gone hard for the whole fall season. I was a little beat up feeling. I was like, I'm going to take like 2 weeks off and that's going to be nice. And then I'll ramp up training. Took off 2 weeks, had like 2 days of feeling good, got the flu for another 2 weeks. And then, Christmas, New Year's stuff. So yesterday was like my first day back of being like, okay, we're like, wasn't expecting a full month away, but here we are, haven't taken one of those in a minute.
I know. And it wasn't a restful month. It was just a chaos month.
Yeah. So,
amidst the chaos of the new year, I think lots of people are making goals, making resolutions. Say what you want about resolutions. There's a whole conversation online about resolutions, but essentially they're just goals.
Yeah.
And no matter when you make goals, it's important to have goals. And one of my goals of this past year of 2023 was like to dive deeper into specific topics and learn more about those topics. And those sort of manifested themselves into the remix episodes that I put out. And I think that's an important thing. And I learned a lot this past year about my learning process and how to make it better. And most of us are listening to podcasts or watching YouTube or reading books or whatever to educate ourselves on something. It's either education or entertainment. It's kind of one of the two.
Yeah.
Sometimes the two are blended, but that's tougher than it seems, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But the education component of it is why we started this thing to begin with, to help people become better climbers, learn how to make themselves better climbers. And I really want to get back to that. So this first episode of the year is important for me, as well as I hope it's important for a lot of other folks to just better learn, or how to better learn through media, podcasts, YouTubes. I guess I could say better learn how to better learn.
Yeah, the meta learning
of the media these days.
Yeah.
And one of the things I heard a lot last year, I don't hear it in like the normal zeitgeist, but in the world of like learning and education, I heard the term microlearning a lot. And microlearning is really cool, and there's quite a bit of research behind it that if you're learning a topic in small little chunks, it sticks better for some people. But I also heard people applying microlearning to like Instagram posts and YouTube shorts and things like that. And those things are micro, but it's not micro learning. Micro learning is delving deep into a single topic in little chunks. And that's not what happens when we're on Instagram or YouTube, at least not by default.
Yeah. It's not very deliberate.
Right.
Like you're not going into it with a plan of saying, okay, here's what I want to learn. Here's what, what I've laid out for this 15-minute block kind of thing. You tell hey, whatever makes you feel better as you just like scroll around. Like,
yeah. And I just found myself like, you get caught in that scroll. We get like rewarded for the number of books we read, or we're listening to podcasts on 2 times speed so we can listen to more of them. There's this whole more mentality. And I think that it feels good because you can say to somebody, I read this many books this year, I read 100 books this year. But did you actually learn anything from those books, and how much? Was it just surface level? You read a thing, that quote stuck with you. Is that learning? That's really why I wanted to do this episode, because I think I've learned some things over the last year. And I think this is a thing that you've spent a lot of time doing, figuring out your process of learning through these things. And I wanted to kind of give folks some ways to learn better. And that trend of, I read more, I watched more, I listened to more, I think is going the wrong direction. And I see coaches, there's a trend for coaches on Instagram and YouTube, people who call themselves coaches. I won't say they're all coaches just because you call them yourself that, to watch another video or read another person's post or take a course from somebody, and immediately, within 24 hours, they're turning it around and posting it as education on their own site, on their own Instagram, on their own YouTube. And that's always seemed wrong to me. Like, I don't want to present things as fact or as a theory that I've spent time with if I just learned it that day. Or that week, or even that month. I want to spend time and have experience with it and understand it, see its pros and cons, see why it might not be useful for a certain type of person, and then I can post about it. But that's not really what's happening.
Yeah, no, I completely agree here. And I'm in this situation to where I used to consume a lot of information. And a lot of that was just, I enjoyed it. And like, I washed windows. So I would wish I would listen to podcasts 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And I think that was a great use of time. I would approach it differently now, and we'll talk about that later. But yeah, there was something kind of fun about it. People could be like, oh, have you checked out the Strength Matters podcast? And I could literally just listen to an entire catalog. Like if someone's like, oh, have you heard of Power Company? I could listen to our catalog in a month, because I would listen anywhere between 2 and 3 times speed for 8 hours a day. It's like, cool. Like I can blast through anyone's entire archive. And that was kind of enjoyable. Also, like, there is something to when you consume a massive amount of media like that, you do start to pick up on fundamental themes in a way that can be hard if you're just listening to 1 or 2 things at a time.
Totally.
So I will say there can be a benefit to that. But it's wild thinking about how I listen to things now. Because for me now, like, an hour and a half podcast might take me 3+ hours to get through. Because I try to consume podcasts the way I consume books. Like, this is an interaction. I'm trying to actively be a participant here. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to maybe have disagreements with whoever's talking. I'm going to think about, what is their perspective? Why would they say that? What is it that they've seen that makes them feel that way? Or like, what is it that I've seen that makes me defensive when I hear this? Like, who do I know that this applies to? Who does this not apply to? All of these different things. Like, yeah. And shoot, it makes me a little sad the years after window washing. Like every year I go through and I have to just unsubscribe and fully delete an old podcast because I'm like, I don't have the time anymore. Like for me to listen to 3 podcast episodes a week, that's like I had to be deliberate to make that time.
Yeah, totally. And the other downside of listening on 2 or 3 times speed is that then when you have a conversation with a real person, you're like, why are you talking so slow?
Where's the little dial for this? Oh my, yeah. No, I definitely, I don't do that as much anymore. It like, yeah, I don't know that that's fully healthy.
Yeah. And, I'm the same way. I've consumed a lot of this stuff. And in years past, I was just consuming it as fast as possible and as much as possible. And the thing I was missing there is the experience with it, whether that's
Yes.
an actual physical experience, like I'm trying to put this into play in the real world and seeing how it actually works in a real life, or I'm having a discourse with someone about it, whether in agreement or disagreement or whatever. One of our first road trips for doing workshops across the US, we listened to the audiobook The Tribe.
Yeah.
Seth Godin, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it took us a long time to get through that audiobook because
Yeah.
every 5 minutes we were pausing and having a 30-minute conversation on what he's talking about. And that's the only reason I remember the title of the book and what the book was about. I've read so many books that once I put it down, I'll forget the title. I can't really tell you what it was about. I might pick up on 3 or 4 little anecdotes in it,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't really learn what the book was trying to tell me. Not in the way I would have if I would have had a conversation with somebody about it, trying to apply it to real life, real experience, real people.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's funny. I had like in my notes, I actually had that written down, like something I appreciate because I think this drives some people crazy. But like whenever we do hang out together and we'll be like going somewhere, like we can be listening to a podcast or whatever, it's like it is just normal. Like one of us will reach up, hit pause, and we talk. Like, and that is just an absolute constant. And that's something I do by myself all the time. I mean, there's times where I will like listen to something, I'll be like, oh man, okay, yeah, I think I've got it. I'll hit play, hear 5 more words, and immediately hit pause again. I'm like, well, now that I think about it more, like that's like, it. That's what really makes it valuable and makes it stick. And you look at the research on like listening to audio books versus reading them, and one of the biggest things about it is like when we listen, we're more often this passive observer. We're here. It's as if we're being lectured to. We're just sitting. It's like a TED talk. Like, okay, it's just I'm having information poured over me. But whenever you're reading, you're like it takes work to read. So you are a participant. This is something you're having to actively consume, and so you're more likely to pause and think about things. You're more likely to be like, oh, like I don't know. Do I agree with that? I'm not sure. And like you might stop and look things up. Like it's not that common for people to be listening to a podcast, hit pause, like grab their phone and look something up. Like most likely, also it's like podcasts are often a secondary activity. You're doing dishes, you're doing yard work. I know I know of a couple of people who are software engineers who will just have podcasts playing in the background as they're working. Which to me is like, I get it. Because it's like, if you're going to listen to something, like that's better than nothing. But at the same time, it's like, oh man, like I just, having used to be that way. And now being someone who like really tries to be active on consuming information, what I consume, man, I can just, I could never go back. Like, I feel like I miss so much when I just let it pour over me.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a conversation, sort of. That's not the right word. There's a discourse of sorts on the social media platforms, but it usually goes one of two ways. I think on Instagram, it's far more often to see the like negative discourse, like someone
Yeah.
just wants to point out what's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
On YouTube, it's far more likely people are just saying, "This is great, keep it up."
Yep.
So there's not often. There are unicorns out there that have, discourse regularly that's really productive. But it's not as easy to find these days.
No.
For whatever reason, it's just not what people do.
No, honestly, I mean, and this is a tiny bit of a tangent, but discourse is, I think it's something that a lot of us never learned. And I mean, and for me, like, growing up between my family and like a lot of my friends, like being able to disagree with people was not something I ever practiced. Because either like I was around people who were very defensive if they were ever disagreed with, or they were just so agreeable that it never happened. And it really was just a couple years ago that I was introduced to the idea that like disagreeing with someone, honestly, like it's a sign of respect to be able to say like, hey, I trust you enough that we can have this disagreement and we can go into this. And we know that this isn't about like our friendship. This isn't about anything else. And like, we can walk away from this disagreeing and that's totally fine. Or, we can have this conversation and both learn from each other. Like, I think it's a great sign of respect to be able to disagree with someone, in a respectful way. And that's like, I think that's something that's really challenging to do in a lot of platforms.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's challenging to do all around for most of us.
Yeah.
But especially challenging when you're typing it out. They can't see your body language. They can't see your face.
Can't hear the tone
or
you use.
Can't hear your tone. Yeah. Like I love to disagree in person.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to work on that as well because my disagreement takes on like a very strong tone and a lot of people can't get past that. So I need to be softer in my disagreement, more questioning, less sure of my disagreement. And I'm trying to learn that. But online, we can't see those things. And it's hard to make a post seem really curious as opposed to, I just disagree with you're wrong. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Like I see you in your YouTube comments to people asking them further questions. Like when they say a thing, you ask them a question about it. And a lot of the times there's no response. And I think people are like, oh shit, somebody's asking a question of me. Like, what's happening? Is he, is he about to come at me or, what's going on? I think people just don't know how to have a real conversation in those platforms. And it's hard. I admit that.
It is. I mean, and it's because it's also unfortunate that like some people just truly find joy in being antagonistic, or some people will come into the situation. Some people also just come into the situation without enough information. And so they're like, oh, well, that's clearly wrong. And it's like, well, you don't have enough base information to be able to contribute to this, which it's like, there are plenty of things I do not have nearly enough information. Like I don't have enough knowledge to hold an opinion on a lot of things.
Yeah,
but
totally.
On the internet, that doesn't matter. We all get a platform.
We're supposed to have an opinion about everything.
Yes. I think another thing that can be tough with this whole, like with trying to learn is knowing what to prioritize. When I first started listening to climbing podcasts, there's two basically. Like there weren't that many. And so once again, I was window washing. It's like, cool. I listened to all 35 episodes. No, there weren't even, because I think I'm like the 17th person interviewed on training beta. So I'd listened to like all 15 at that point. Like that was it. That was the entire encyclopedia of like training for climbing podcasts. So then it was like, oh, well, I have to go listen elsewhere, which meant I had to actually do a little legwork myself. It's like, well, what do I want to listen to? Like, and why? Where now, Jesus, there are so many and a lot of good ones too. Like that's one of the things that actually kind of kills me about, I just don't have the time to listen to so many is like there's a lot of really good podcasts out there that are, climbing training or climbing training tangential that I love, and I just can't make the time for it. But
Totally.
that's a very big difference of I have to go hunting to find new things versus there is more than I could ever consume. And that's where we are now. So you have to be able to discern what's actually important. And what is presented to us often is what is new, what is shiny. Like, let's say someone there's some new concept that is very exciting right now. Well, whoever is talking about that concept is probably going to go around on multiple podcasts talking about it. So suddenly you're going to hear it from a lot of different platforms. It's going to seem very important because it sounds like it's everywhere, but it might not be. It might just be new. And the thing is, if you were out of town for the week and didn't download any podcasts, you might never have heard about that. Like for that week, it seems like it was everywhere and so important because that's how fast we can be overwhelmed by social media, by podcast, YouTube, things like that. But yeah, 2 weeks later, no one will ever talk about it again. So we have to decide what is actually relevant to us, what's important. Because if we consume everything and we're not discerning what actually should we be paying attention to, the chances of us actually having the important lessons stick is much less likely.
Totally. And I'll also say from a podcaster's point of view, I think I was the third climbing podcast, second training podcast behind the Enormocast and Training Beta.
Mm-hmm.
I came shortly after Training Beta, and back then it was like you could spend 3 weeks or a month really putting together a good episode.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's on any given day, there are 20 new episodes coming out from different climbing podcasts, good climbing podcasts.
Yeah, it's unreal.
And a lot of them are weekly. Some of them are even more frequent than that. So you get caught in this like race to put out content, more content, more content, more content. It's the same on Instagram. It's the same on YouTube. It's everywhere. And that just, in most cases, waters down the content. It's everybody ends up posting the same things, talking about the same things, whatever's in the zeitgeist. Like you said, if somebody's got a new concept they're talking about, they go on every show, and then every show has the same interview over and over and over.
The same pro climber who just did the thing, and they I completely agree. Like it is funny that there are multiple podcasts where I'm like, I wish you didn't put out weekly, and not necessarily because of a drop in quality, but also it's just like, I can't keep up. Like I would love to listen to every single edition of like Careless Talk with Sam Pryor and Aiden Roberts. I love those guys. I'd love to listen to every single one, but they're weekly and I can't, and it makes me sad.
Yeah. And I think, that's an interesting example. The Careless Talk podcast is interesting because it has educational and informational tones in it, but it's often entertaining as well because you want to listen to those guys talk. They do a pretty good job of mixing entertainment with education, and I think most of the time those two things are different and maybe should be kept separate. Like each is going to have a little bit of the other in it. But for me anyway, it's very hard to make a podcast episode that's entertaining and really informational, really good, packed full of good information. For me, that was the remix episodes. And those take so long to make. If this podcast were just remix episodes, I would put out like 6 episodes a year, which might be okay, if that's what people really want. So for me, at least, one of the things I'm trying to do is split the two apart a little more. I'm not going to do many entertaining podcasts on this show. I think some people are entertained by our banter in the board meetings, but we also try to keep those really educational. So those are a mix similar to Careless Talk.
Yeah.
Whereas, my other show, Written in Stone, that one is purely entertainment focused, but there's certainly an education component in it. Like you're learning things about history, but it's very much an entertainment podcast. So I'm trying to split the two apart to make it easier for people to decide what they want.
Yeah, I think that can be great. And something that is really important for trying to learn more about, from podcasts, YouTube, things like that, is find the voices that really resonate with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is, I think a really good example of this is a lot of people want to learn about improving their mental game in climbing. And I think that is still, I think that's still just a topic that there's a lot of people talking about it, and a lot of people just don't connect with the different voices. Like,
yeah,
a couple classic examples, like one, Arno Illner, who, the man, like he's been doing it forever, and he's it's a very soft side. Like, hey, this is, it's named The Warrior's Way. Like, it's very much like taming the ego and like this softer approach, which works for a ton of people. Some people it doesn't connect with. They're like, it's a little like too woo-woo yoga-y. And then you have like Jerry Moffat's Mastermind. And he's, he's basically like, wake up, look in the mirror, remind yourself, you're the fucking best. Okay,
I am
go
the
out.
champion.
I am the champion. Repeat it 30 times. Go on-site DDA Rabbitohs project. Like,
Yeah, totally.
You're just like, Jesus Christ, Jerry. Like, and some people, they're just like, oh, that was it, man. That's like, just, that's fantastic. And, it's funny. I had someone message me just last week. They're like, have you read that book? Is that what it takes to climb hard? I'm like, no, it isn't. Like, it isn't. Like, if you vibe with that, cool, man. Like, but a lot of people hear that and they're just like, that just feels like this. To them, it feels like this false, like, bravado that they'd have to put on.
Yeah.
So I think the mental learning side is the most obvious example of you need to find the voice that resonates with you. Like, just because you read one and you're like, oh, that's not for me, doesn't mean that mental training isn't for you. Like, keep searching, like keep going around, and it changes throughout time. Like, the first time I tried to read Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, hated it. Like, and I think I was in my early 20s. Can't imagine why, a book about ego was a thing that I wasn't resonating with. Weird. But, I came back to it probably like 4 or 5 years later, and I think I've read it 3 times now. I think it's fantastic. But yeah, so we go through different stages in life, but it's like, yes, I think mental training is a perfect example of you need different voices. But the same is true with everything. Like, if someone is trying to explain the metabolic pathways of energy systems and they're putting you to sleep, man, change channel. There are people who can explain it in a different way. And if you want something, maybe one of my favorite examples, the first time I tried to read the Anderson Brothers book, Rock Climbers Training Manual, I was talking with an engineer and I was like, oh yeah, I'm like halfway through it. Man, it really reads like a college biology textbook. And they're like, I know, right? Isn't it great? And I was like, that was not how I was going to finish that sentence, but I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, I agree completely. And especially nowadays with so many different voices out there approaching topics from different perspectives and different angles and, at different points in their climbing journey.
Yeah.
There's something out there for everyone. So, if we're talking about actual better ways to learn, that's certainly one of the first steps is like find the authors, the creators, the voices, whatever it is that really resonate with you and that you can really be more focused on.
Yeah.
There might be a podcast out there you love, but maybe it does become one of those like background podcasts for you. if that's the case, that might not be your educational podcast. It might not be the best one to learn from. You might need somebody who wakes you up a little more and forces you to listen.
Yeah. Yeah. And it changes through time. Like there's, and through different stages. Like one of my favorite pieces of information. There was a big like analysis done with, I think it was pianists, like professional piano players, and they were trying to look at like what are things that these people have in common. And one was, on average, I think they had 7 teachers throughout
Right.
throughout their entire career. Which that alone, I mean, that's like the main point. One other little thing I found interesting was another thing they had in common is the first teacher for all of them instilled a love of music into them.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing. If you have 7 music teachers throughout your entire career, one isn't necessarily better than the other. Like you need the right one for the right time. Like if you took the number 7 teacher, the one who like can take you from being a professional to being a great professional, and you tried to like have them as a beginner, you might never have loved music. Like you might burn out immediately and be like, no, not for me. I'm going to go play baseball, whatever. Like you need to find the right people at the right time. And it's okay that, if at some point you're like, hey, like this was great. Like I learned a lot of lessons from this person. I'm ready to move on to something else. That's okay. Like I think that's totally fine.
Yeah, and you to do that, to really understand where that person is coming from and where they're at in their journey, what their biases are, you have to dig in a little deeper than just a surface level skim of what they're doing. And that's the best way to understand whether the information is for you or not. They might be in a completely different place in their career, in their journey. They may, maybe they're a person with no kids, no family, and they've got all this free time and they can live in a van and travel, versus a person who has kids and a family and a full-time job. And the advice from those two people are going to be drastically different and fit a drastically different population. So you have to understand who it is you're listening to. And to do that, you have to dig a little deeper.
I completely agree. And that's one of the points I really want to talk about is we all have a bias, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's funny I feel like since Harper's been born, every now and then I see people comment, they're just like, oh, we need like a Dads of Bouldering podcast now. Like,
Right.
I want more information on how to balance having young kids with trying to train and climb hard and be, productive in life still. And that so you like your bias, just the lens you're looking through has shifted. And a lot of people saw that and they're like, oh, that's great. Like, can we get more of that?
Yeah.
So a bias isn't a bad thing, but it's really important to know like what these are. Like, and I've got a couple different examples. And I'll pick on myself as well. But years ago, I remember hearing Steve Bechtel say, running helps your climbing the way climbing helps your running, which is a very fun, cute quip.
Yeah.
And I remember when I heard it, I was like, I very strongly disagree with this. Like, I was like, I was still very new into my coaching. And I was like, I just don't vibe with this. But I mean,
I strongly agreed just because I hated running.
Oh, that's just it. I mean, it would be the same as if I came out and was like, hey, apple fritters are going to reduce your likelihood of pulley injuries. Everyone's like, let's fucking go. Like, okay, no one's going to disagree with this. Like, everyone's like, yeah, more donuts. Okay. And so everyone just like very quickly accepted it. And the thing is, like, Steve's been climbing a long time. He's been coaching a tremendous amount of time. He's very educated. He's a hands-on coach. Like, so it's not like he was saying something he believed was wrong. And it took me going to Lander and talking to Landerites.
Yeah.
Landarians. In realizing, oh, this is a mountain town. Like, people don't take rest days. They go hiking in the mountains. They go cross country skiing. They go regular skiing. Like they do alpine days. They are moving nonstop. Even just like, you go to Sinks, the roadside crag, it's like a 10-minute steep uphill hike with, 20, 30-pound pack on. Yeah.
Right.
These people, all the people who have surrounded Steve for his entire climbing and coaching life, they don't need to run. They need to rest. Absolutely. And he came out, I think it was like 2 years ago, he was on the Nugget podcast and he was like, oh, had a little whoopsie daisy when I said don't run, because I forgot that most people live in cities. Most people who climb, they live in cities. They go, and the most activity they're getting is they go to the gym and they boulder 3 times a week. Like those people should be doing some base aerobic work, like some cardio, some general stuff. And he had recommended like rucking and things like that. And yeah, that's like, I think that's awesome. He was able to like kind of step back and be like, oh, I had my lens and this is something different. Another more recent one was Ollie Tor was on the Nugget podcast talking about building base endurance through just bouldering, just big bouldering sessions. And he talks about it quite a bit. And podcast ends, he goes out and he's talking with another coach. And the other coach is like, hey, or like they have this conversation and it becomes obvious to him. He's like, ooh, I need to go clarify some things. So he calls up Steven, gets back in, and there's a little like addition at the end. He was like, hey, little thing that's important to note. I coach Olympians. I coach people who train 30, 40 hours a week. So when I said that Toby Roberts didn't train endurance all winter, came back and had a great lead season, it's because he had 5 8-hour sessions a week. So yes, that is great for endurance, but for your normal everyday person, no, endurance work is actually important. Like if you don't have a full-time job of being a climber, this might not be helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is like, we all have some sort of bias, and I will, I'll throw myself under the bus here. Early in my coaching, I looked around, and I have to stop this feeling all the time. I looked around and I was like, all of you are too strong. Like you're all just so strong, like, and so much stronger than you need to be. And I felt like the answer was everyone just needs to get better at climbing. Like, I see people who it's like, oh, you're 150 pounds and you can dead hang with 100 pounds on you on a 1-pad edge and you climb 12A. What do you need to do? You need to have your significant other hide your hangboard from you for the next year and go climb. And every time you're on the wall, move like you give a shit. Like, once again, younger 20-year-old coach, I had very strong feelings. But here's the thing. Like, if you want great technique in this sport, you need to dedicate thousands of hours of deliberate practice, moving like you care in order to truly become great, like an absolute fantastic mover. If you want to be one of those people who, like, you can climb 514 being a V8 boulderer.
Absolutely.
But you need to log a lot of hours climbing, moving, climbing on rock, things that take a lot of time. You need to have a lot of your mental space taken up by climbing and thinking about how to move better, how to be more tactical. And here's the thing, like, I recognize now most people don't have the time for that. They also just like, a lot of people are like, hey, I have a family I care about. I have other things I care about. They can't put in this insane amount of time and dedication. And so, for these people, like, it's not fair for me to say, oh, you just need to get better. Because it's like, you know what? Like, you can get stronger being completely mindless. Like, one of my favorite Roland Chen quotes was, I don't know why people feel like strength training has to be that complicated. Just pick up heavy shit and eat more chicken. Like,
Yeah.
The thing is, you can be mentally drained, short on time, and you can show up and you can get stronger. You don't have to be that mentally like locked in. You just show up, you give a decent effort for a couple years, you're going to get real strong. And for a lot of people, like, that's what they have. That's what they have access to for a lot of their time. They can be deliberate and get a lot of work out of technical practice. And that's something that I am trying to push forward. Like, how can we make the most out of the time we have? And that's a huge thing with my YouTube now is like, how can we make the time we have more potent? But my bias very much was, like, people just all need to get better unequivocally. And frankly, that's I disagree with my old self now. Like, they do need to get better, but I don't think everyone has the time for it.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that. And, another, like, sort of the flip side of this, find the voices that you resonate with and, that sort of fit your situation. Um, the trick about those is, like, let's say you don't listen to the nugget, those episodes are just too long for me. I don't have the time, and they're not the type of episodes I'm looking for right now.
Yeah.
But you did hear Steve on another podcast say, running is stupid, don't run. But then you never listen to that nugget episode, so you never hear him reverse that.
Yeah.
And you've also heard Jonathan Segrist sort of say, yeah, Steve Bechtel and the Anderson brothers both told me stop doing all the running, and that's one of the best things I ever did for my climbing. Jonathan used to run, 15 miles on his rest days in the mountains.
Yes.
So of course it wasn't helping him anymore.
Yeah.
So the trick with, like, I'm only going to listen to these voices is that they're doing the same, like, they're doing the same content scramble that everyone else is. We're all trying to, like, fill our schedules with things, put out more content. So for me, I like find the things that resonate with you. And then where I go from there is, if I hear a guest or a topic from a voice that resonates with me, I then dive into that topic. Like, I take a side road and I'm like, and this is actual micro learning. Like, I might spend, I'll make a playlist on Spotify of all these podcast episodes I found that dive into this topic. I'll get a couple books on my Kindle about this topic.
Yeah.
And then for the next several weeks or month or whatever, depending on how big the topic is, I'm reading all about effort or all about failure. And I'm digging into those topics, listening to a bunch of different people talk about it. And then when I find one that I'm like, oh, that's interesting, I want to hear this person on other podcasts and see what other guests are pulling out of them.
Yeah.
So I go down this big web of the voices that resonate with me, the things I find interesting, the things I disagree with. I'm like you said in the beginning, why do I disagree with this so strongly? Let me hear this person again talking about the same thing and see what that host can pull out,
Yeah.
So for me, that's a really important part of this that I've only learned this year. It used to be, I'm just going to listen to every episode of this podcast because I like this one and this person resonates with me. Now it's, when that person has a guest on or brings up a topic that I want to explore further, then I have to branch off and go elsewhere and spend a few weeks or a month. And the nice thing about that is then I get to come back and there's fresh episodes, and I can cherry pick the ones I want instead of feeling like I have to listen to every episode because I'm running out of things to listen to.
Yeah. I think having these learning projects is such a great way to go. And it's, there's this concept of just-in-time learning versus just-in-case learning. So just in case is like, well, I'm going to consume everything and, I'm going to try and absorb what I can just in case I might need it someday. Versus if you're like, oh man, I'm really interested in, base aerobic endurance. Like, I want to learn that. Like, that's important to me now. So this would be like the just-in-time learning. Like, oh, this is important. I want to learn about it. Cool. I'm going to consume everything on this topic. And then suddenly, like, when we have a reason for wanting to learn it, that makes it connect more. Because suddenly you're like, okay, well, how do I apply this? What do I do with this? It makes it so much more valuable than the just-in-case learning. Like, so often I will have coaching sessions with someone, and if this is a new person, or I'll do a remote consultation with someone, they'll send me a ton of video. I watch it. We have conversation at the end. I'm like, hey, I'll separate like 10 minutes out at the very end. I'm like, these are the things I think are the most important. These are your big rocks. And often people will be like, oh, yeah, I've heard about that before. Like, I'm like, cool. Okay. So what have you done to apply this information? They're like, oh, I haven't done anything, but I've heard about it. And it's like, okay, like, and people are mixed about it because some people are like, oh, I've heard about it. Cool. Okay. And some people are like, oh, I've heard about that before. Like, because they want something new. And I think that is also a danger of trying to listen to everything is we immediately wear out the novelty of everything. And so when, it is presented to you again, you're like, oh yeah, I've heard about that. I've heard about like, whatever, hangboarding, but yeah, whatever. Like, because it's not new, it doesn't seem like it should apply to you. But yeah, you talked earlier about this idea of it's so much cooler to read 50 books than it is to read 5. Like, a lesson that I had heard forever and it took me a long time to take to heart is if you only read one book every year, but you apply what you learned from it, there's nothing that can beat that. Like, it doesn't matter how many books you read. And that's something that, like, I used to be a lot more prolific of a reader. And I mean, frankly, like, what's funny is oftentimes I don't even finish a lot of these books I'll read because I'll get halfway through and I'm like, oh, this is enough. Like, this is enough information for me to work through for the next 6 months. Like, and sometimes, like, I go through and after those 6 months, I'm like, okay, that was a big change. I'm excited for something else now. And so it might be 2-3 years before I come back and finish that book, or if ever.
Yeah.
But if I took away enough to where I was like, oh, this is a big impactful change, amazing. Like, it doesn't matter if I only read one chapter of the book, if it had a great impact.
Yeah, I really like this just in time versus just in case framework, especially for climbing coaches or people, self-coaching, because if you're following on the Instagrams and the YouTubes and the podcast, there's so much out there that so many people are saying is so important.
Yes.
That it's overwhelming if you try to take all of that in. And it could be really valuable to say, okay, what's the just in case information? What's the just in time information? What are the things I really need to be listening to, consuming, learning about versus what can I put more on the just in case side of things for when I'm not really digging deep into a topic. So I like that distinction a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you enjoy the just in case information, like, that is fine. Like, there's plenty of stuff, I follow a lot of like track and field accounts and things like that, where it's like,
same.
oh, this is just some like explosive jump training and things like that. Look, this is so far from relevant to what I do, but man, it's cool. It's like, it's cool. It's also just fun seeing people who are really good athletes. So I follow plenty of things, and that is, for me, of what I consume, 99% of it's just in case. Like, every now and then I'm like, ooh, okay, that's kind of interesting. I could apply that. But some of it's just, no, this is fun. I like seeing good athletes and hearing how they train. And I recognize that it's not actually that applicable. But I think that's important because in the past, I would have been like, everything I hear from any great coach in any great sector is important.
I also think a lot of, that sort of can be divided into the entertainment versus education section of things. Like,
yeah.
I think it's important to have the entertainment and binge the entertainment if you want to. I am a binger. If it's a true crime podcast, I don't even want to start episode 1 until it's finished.
Amazing. Yeah.
Because I know I'm going to listen to the whole thing as fast as possible. I don't want to pause.
Yeah.
So for me, entertainment is binge worthy. I can just keep going from episode to episode to episode to episode to episode. Whereas the education side of things, I don't binge it anymore. It's more like I might binge a topic, but I don't binge a one podcast because they're most often not talking about the same topic 10 episodes in a row. It's usually we're switching topics every episode.
Yeah.
So for me, the just in case is sort of in the same column as entertainment, whereas the just in time is in the column of education, at least in terms of how I interact with the two.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that I like that distinction.
Yeah.
So one thing I'll talk about briefly, because I think a lot of people hear the value about learning from video.
Yeah.
There are a lot of sports where it's like, you watch film, you study film, you need to watch people who are better than you. I remember an interview with a high-level Olympic lifter who, like, in his first few years of Olympic lifting, the gym he was at, they would always have a TV going with these like old films of like great Olympic lifters. And then one day his coach was like, "Oh, here, we should watch this." And he was watching this video. He's like, "Dude, who are these amateurs that we're watching?" And he was like, "This is like the US Nationals. These are like US national champions." But he had only been watching like the best, like Olympic caliber. So like when he actually watched people who were just good for our nation, he was like, "Oh, they're so slow. Like, all these things are so unathletic." So it was funny that his framework had been only looking at the most elite, and that was who he was trying to mimic. And that that was the technique he wanted to go to. And I think there's absolutely value in that. Like, I've made the joke several times. I feel like I follow half of Tokyo at this point, because anytime I find I'm like, oh, there's a new V15, V16 Japanese boulderer, follow. Like, I love the way those people move. Like,
yeah, the family tree of Dai Koyamada is definitely worth the follow.
Yes. But yeah, like, I mean, so many of those climbers, like, so what I often do is I pick a style. Early in my climbing, I really wanted to get good at momentum. So I mimicked Ty Landman's style because I thought he had the best use of momentum I had seen. And so I would watch all of his videos. And same thing, if I would see him do a boulder, I might pull up a video of someone else doing it. Maybe I'd watch Daniel Woods doing it and compare the two. And it's like, okay, well, how would Daniel, a more static climber, do this versus this momentum? And man, I just did this deep dive for, probably 6-8 months on anytime I watched anyone move, all I paid attention to was their momentum usage. Where did they generate it from in their body? What direction were they moving? How much momentum did they have when they hit the destination hold? This, I think, is such a good way to analyze videos. Because if you just watch, if you're like, I'm going to watch videos of Yanya,
yeah,
what are you going to watch? What
you just walk away from everyone with wow, she's really good.
Oh yeah, who wouldn't just? Yes, and I think there's definitely value to that. Just simply watching the greats, I think is good, but we can get higher value. Pay attention to if you're like, oh, I want to get really good at footwork and being able to maximize, let's say you have great mobility, but you feel like you could use your legs better, man, go watch Oriane Berton. Watch her climb indoors, watch her climb outside. My God. She's one of the best in the world at it. There are so many, pick a theme and then just go hunting for people. If I want to see someone who can just use all 4 points, both arms, both legs together in just this symphony of movement, I'm watching Dai Koyamada. I think that's a really great way to go. And when you watch, find the people, look for one thing, rewatch the video. If you ever see something where you're like, wow, that was crazy, hit pause, rewind, watch it again. Man, sometimes I'll even, I screen record things on Instagram so that I can scrub through, and I'll rewatch a single move 20, 30 times until I'm like, oh, I understand how they did it now. Because
totally.
I don't want anything to feel mystical. And it's fun when you watch something, you're like, wow, I can't believe someone could do that. And that's a fun feeling, but I want to be able to dissect it so I can know, oh, I see what they did now. That's a really clever usage of this. And I think I have a grasp of it.
Yeah, I do think there's I love this more global learning from watching other people climb. And this is a sort of a tangent. We should do a whole episode on this, I think. But there's a big push to like always video yourself when you're climbing now, and then analyze every video and then compare it to other people doing the problem or, doing the move or whatever. And I think there's a big pitfall here in that we aren't always focused on the right thing to solve whatever problem it is we're facing. We might get fixated on my hips are too far from the wall, or I'm, holding this hold at a slightly different wrist angle and I need to fix that. And that might not be the problem at all. We all solve things in different ways. There's infinite solutions to almost every move in climbing if we boil down the details enough.
Yeah.
So I think there's a pitfall there, but I do love the like follow a theme through a bunch of videos, watch a person or a style, and just dig deep into that and then try to imitate it, try to learn from it, try to, take it to the gym and make it an experiential thing instead of, oh, I'm just going to watch these and that's where it stops.
Totally. And I think this is actually one of the best uses of video. Like I think video is great. I think I used to just be like, man, video everything. It's fantastic. It's a great tool, until I started meeting people who were so heavily reliant on video that like if they forgot to hit record, they couldn't tell you what just happened. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that could happen. Like, because when I started, it was like, dude, video was film. Like,
I mean,
like,
you had to lug around a thing the size of a giant Patagonia duffel bag.
Yeah, if you were rewatching, it was on like a tiny little screen, or you had to take the tape and like put it inside of like a VHS, I don't know what those were called, but it like slipped inside a giant VHS husk that you would then put into your player, and that's how you would watch it back. And so, yeah, of course, it didn't video very much. My first 3 years of climbing, there's, probably a collective 10 minutes of me climbing. But I think for a video of yourself, one thing that is useful is things like drills or like trying to copy styles. Because for a lot of people, this is one of my favorite things. I'll be like, hey, let's try and over exaggerate momentum, like use a ton of momentum for every move. And in their mind, they're just like Yoshiyuki Ogata on the wall. And then they watch themselves climb and they're like, oh, yikes, I am just a rock sloth right now. It's like when you hear your own voice for the first time, you're like, is that what I really sound like? And I think for that, it's great. Like, let's see, climb, try and move in extremes of try and move really statically, twist for every move, climb square, and then see the video so that you can basically make these connections between what is actually happening and what feels like it's happening. I think that's a fantastic usage of video.
To continue the video theme, let's sort of get into some really concrete things people can do to better learn, to streamline their learning process. And you've got a note on here about algorithms that I hadn't thought about that I think is really a brilliant way to go that maybe a lot of people aren't considering.
Yeah, this is one of those things that when you hear it, you're like, duh. But until you do it, it's hard to fully appreciate it. But the algorithm that you see whenever you open, let's say, Instagram, you have control over that. It's always
YouTube as well.
YouTube, you can hit not interested or don't suggest this channel. And you can do the same thing on Instagram. Even if it's your friend, if they're constantly posting about, whatever it is, and, you have a buddy, you like him, he posts about golf and fishing a lot. And, you can just hit mute. Great. You're not seeing golf and fishing anymore. And, if he messages you, it doesn't show that you're no longer following him. It's fantastic. But I had heard about this forever. And I was one of those people who was like, oh, I just feel like, Instagram doesn't show me what I want anymore. And I feel like the app's going downhill. And I'd heard other people saying this. And then finally I was like, I'm going to go through and just fully prune everything I follow. And I mean, I muted hundreds of accounts. It's amazing. It's it is actually whenever I open it, I only see what I want to see now. In the second I'm like, oh, I don't like this isn't doing me any good anymore, I get rid of it. Just follow the things that actually bring you joy, things that educate you. Like if something
Yeah.
bothers you that you see, mute it. It doesn't matter if it's your Aunt Joan talking about the knickknacks in her hall closet. Like, mute her. Like, you'll see her at Thanksgiving.
And there's definitely, people are going to push back against that and say, well, then you're creating this echo chamber. Instagram should be a better reflection of the complete world. Not going to happen no matter what you do. So why not make it a thing that really works for you instead of trying to create this false real world that's never actually going to happen? I would rather get the things that I disagree with in a place where I can have an actual productive discourse about them, as opposed to a place where if I disagree, I'm just going to get 80 people, trashing me for other things. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's I think I've brought this up before, but one of my buddies, whenever he starts a training program, he stops listening to climbing podcasts. He stops reading new articles. And he was talking with a coach one day about it. And the coach was like, what do you mean you're not like watching YouTube videos and listening to podcasts? He was like, why would I? I'm training. Like, I don't need new information right now. Like, that's just a distraction. And the coach was like, mind blown, couldn't believe it, was like, you're doing it wrong. Like, it's like, this guy keeps getting results year after year and he doesn't get distracted. Like, I think there's something to that.
I know a lot of musicians who do a similar thing when they're working on their own album. Yeah, either they stop listening to everything else or they only listen to a specific like genre that they're inspired by. You know, like if I'm making a bluesy rap album, I'm only going to listen to like old blues from the 40s, you know, to be inspired by it. I'm going to stop listening to everything else. I think that's a really smart way to go, frankly.
Yeah. And, if you're a coach listening or, if you are someone who teaches, I think there's a lot to this. Like I, no disrespect to anyone, I mute every coach. Like I don't get notifications from almost any coach or most creators in the climbing space because I mean, I get it. The algorithm is such a thing that everyone has to constantly be putting things out, but like ironically, I feel like if you follow everyone, that's more of an echo chamber than anything because one thing gets posted and then everyone needs to post the same thing. And then there becomes this like recency bias of you're like, well, I'm seeing it everywhere. And it's like, this is the thing I keep seeing right now. So it must be important. And for me, it really makes me lose the big picture of like, okay, what's actually important? Because like it doesn't matter how strongly I feel about something. If I see 15 different accounts post about this one thing right now, my brain is naturally just like, oh, this must be important because I keep seeing it everywhere. So yeah, I don't follow many people inside of climbing who do what I do so that I can have my own thoughts. Like if I want to look for that kind of stuff, I will. And I go, I'll go searching and I'll even honestly at this point, like I'm fortunate. I just reach out to people and talk to them directly. I'm like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Because also I'm more likely going to get a real conversation from that anyways than I'm going to get from their posts. Totally. But yeah, I think there's a lot of value in pruning the information that gets presented to you because it's everywhere now. Like we are constantly inundated with information. And if you're just letting it come at you at whatever speed, like that's not control.
Yeah, totally. One of the things I do, not Instagram, but on YouTube as well as on podcasts. I do it on Instagram as well, but far more on YouTube and podcasts. And what I'll do is rather than just going on and scrolling through things to see what catches my interest, I'll go looking for specific things about specific topics. And then I just on Instagram, I'll save them into folders. You know,
Mhm.
I'm not going to really engage with the post right now. I'm just going to save it into a folder. Same with YouTube. I'm not going to watch the video. I'm just going to save it to a private playlist. And same with podcasts. On Spotify, I create playlists. I have a bunch of just private playlists of things I want to listen to on a certain topic. I do that when I'm in the mood to scroll, so that when I am not in the mood to scroll and I want to learn things, I have a big playlist of things there that I can sort through instead of spending my time scrolling and searching for podcasts about failure or whatever. I
Yeah.
now have a whole playlist of them I can just hit play on and listen to them back to back to back if I want to. Different people talking about failure in different ways. I have a podcast playlist for coaching for mastery that's over 50 episodes deep,
Nice.
and still growing. It's just got tons of information on like communication and feedback and different coaching topics that I'm interested in, and that way I can go in and listen to those episodes, sometimes multiple times.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic. Yeah. Organizing information is so valuable.
When it's podcasts for me, there's also I've tried a couple of different apps like Air with 2 R's and Snipped, SNIPD, that allow you to like create little snippets or quotes from the podcast you're listening to just with a touch.
Oh, that's cool.
And they are cool. They don't work as well for me just because I'm someone who has to like listen all the way through.
Mm.
And then I want to go back and find specific parts.
Yeah.
Or listen all the way through again and take notes, I wish I could use those apps better. I think they're really valuable.
Mm-hmm.
My podcast listening process has been created in a way that doesn't leave room for those apps, which is interesting actually, because I use an app to edit podcasts, like when I'm building a remix episode or a written in stone episode or something like that. I listen on an app called Edit Point, where I can stop it at any time and take a note that's time stamped. And that works for me for great effect. And it would work with these episodes as well. But for whatever reason, when I'm just listening to learn, I do it differently than when I'm listening to edit.
Yeah.
So those are an option for people who want to spend a lot of time learning on podcasts. Otherwise, if I'm just learning, I keep a notebook there and I write down timestamps, or I keep a Google Doc open in the room. Like I'll be hangboarding while I'm listening to a podcast and there's a Google Doc open on my computer that I can just type in a timestamp for that podcast episode. Like that's the way I do it when I'm working on remix episodes.
Nice. I like that. I think one thing, if the idea of notes feels daunting to you, one thing that is pretty well proven by research that works really well is, there's a fun name for it. I can't think of it right now, but basically it's like you force yourself to try and recall what you just read or consumed without actually looking back at it. And it's pretty interesting that comparing, if you're like, okay, I'm going to, let's say you read a chapter book or you listen to a podcast, pausing and being like, okay, what was everything they talked about? Doing that compared to actually going back and reviewing, like let's say it's a chapter and you're like, okay, that was good. Let me flip back through and review everything. Doing that, you will actually remember significantly less than if you pause and just force yourself to try and remember. Even if you can't remember everything, it just like basically tells your brain, hey, this is important. Let's like cement this in place a little bit better.
I also like explaining it to someone else.
Yeah.
I do that a lot. I'm sure Annalisa
I was about to say,
it, where I'm like listening on headphones to a podcast and I'll just stop it and I'll be like, hey, did you know this? And I'll just explain this whole thing she doesn't give a shit about.
Yeah.
And for me, that's all part of like connecting dots. Like this whole learning thing is I want to connect the dots between these podcast episodes, this book, this YouTube video, this research paper that I just read? Like, how can I connect all those dots together? So I very often, like you were talking about earlier, pause it and then just consider, how does that relate to this paper I just read last week and this video I watched 2 weeks ago? How does this all relate together?
Yeah. And something that I think is valuable with this too is thinking about, like, I think something we really miss out on with constantly trying to push new information out there by everyone, including us, is there's a lot of great information from 5, 10, 20 years ago. That's super valuable. That, Dave McLeod's 9 out of 10 climbers is a good example. I think it's at like the 15-year mark now. And when I read it, I'm like, God, a lot of this is still really great. Like, there are some things that I disagree with now, but if you can just hold in your mind, okay, this was written in 2007, I think, like, thinking about that, it's like, then you can say, okay, well, I can connect the dot of, he really highly valued this, where maybe that was more relevant for the time. But and you can kind of separate out, and some things you can be like, oh, like he explained it in a very like simple way, but this is something that now maybe we have a little more evidence around. And that's really cool that he was seeing this connection back then, even though, all we had was anecdote at the time. Or maybe we just have stronger anecdote now, because frankly, that's probably what it likely is. But yeah, I think we don't go back in time often enough.
That's a really good point. When I'm looking for like podcast episodes, books, things like that, I try not to look at most recent.
Oh, it's so hard.
Like,
yeah,
it's very hard. But I want to hear the things that were, when this topic was first being discussed. I want to know what the people were thinking back then, because it's entirely possible a tangent has been taken on this topic, or people are going the wrong direction, and you're hitting it just at the point where we're, going down a dead end road or something. So I want to know all the thoughts around it. And this is something that when I started working on these remix episodes was really valuable for me, that I didn't really expect, was that I like keep a resource list as I'm researching, listening, learning, with little notes about what each resource is. But then once I like spend time thinking, and it's a lot of time thinking, it's not constant learning, it's not constant reading, listening, researching.
Yeah.
There's a lot of time just sitting there thinking.
Yeah.
Like, how can I connect all these dots? What does this all mean? How does this relate to this? Then I write it out. And I think that's, if you're a journaler or someone who blogs or whatever, writing it out, writing an essay about the topic is so huge for me, at least. That makes it stick more than any of the just learning and thinking does.
Yeah.
If I try to present it in a way as if I'm teaching it to someone. And there's a fair amount of research saying that trying to teach something to someone is one of the best ways to help learning stick. So for me, the writing it out and trying to say it to everybody else is a huge part of this.
Yeah, I love this. Can't remember who it was, but there was a famous author who, had said, "I don't know what I'm thinking until I write it down." And there's so much to that. I mean, and this is common advice for like if you're going through a stressful time, literally just write about it, and suddenly that gives you a different perspective. I had a client who, I worked with her this last summer, and like she wrote out, I was like, yeah, so tell me what your weekly schedule's like. And she wrote it out, and she was like, oh my God. She was like, I've never seen it written like that. I was like, yeah, we should actually.
I'm that person.
I was like, we should actually hop on a phone call, because this can't be discussed. Like, I was like, there was a lot. And we hopped on a phone, and I have like 2 sheets of paper, and I am like scribbling notes furiously out, because she was just like, yeah, like I didn't realize how insane my schedule is until actually having to like write it down to present to someone. She was like, what do you think about it? And I was like, we can make it work. We can make it work. But you're not wrong. There's a lot.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, it really solidifies things to put them down on paper. And especially if you're trying to like, explain things even, yeah, like essentially writing a book report on like what you learned to, even
Yep.
if it's just for yourself to reference later, which I think is super helpful because I love going back and thinking like, okay, how did I interpret this information at this time? Um, Honestly, like, you'll find so often, like, I mean, this is like the running joke of all training. I mean, probably a lot of life too. Like, you go back and you be like, oh, there'll be all these exclamation points next to something and stars. And this is from 10 years ago. And it's like, this is a huge life lesson. Make sure to learn it. And you're like, oh, man, I wish I would have. This is still relevant now. Like, I'll put a few more stars next to it, maybe highlight it and hope that somehow does it.
Yeah. I've also found that when I'm writing it down, I can more clearly see where I'm going wrong.
Yeah.
Like in the remix episodes in particular, as I'm writing them out and trying to think, and when I'm listening back in my editing process, what I was thinking made sense. When I listen back to it, I'm like, oh, that doesn't really make sense. Let me rework that. Let me try to understand better. Let me go search for this missing component that I didn't realize was missing until I heard myself say it.
Yeah, this happens to me all the time when I'm writing articles for the website. Like, I'll be like, "Oh, well, here's this thing, and I have this I have this thought about this concept, and I'll write it." And then I have to think through the lens of, okay, how will people interpret it? And I'm like, oh, I've combined like 4 thoughts, and I really didn't tie a single one of them up. Like, I I felt like I had a more well-rounded idea on this topic, but really it's just a lot of threads going in different directions. I need to figure out like what do I actually think about this one specific thing if I take it to its logical endpoint. Yeah, I think it's super useful and really points out like, little gaps in your knowledge.
Yeah, and I think there's a big push to like learn more, consume more.
Mhm.
That equals learning more, and I think we know from like the way schools are formatted that memorization and hearing more and
Yeah.
reading more doesn't necessarily mean learning. So I think it's just important for folks. We all have good intentions. We want to learn more things. We want to become better climbers, better athletes. So I'm consuming and learning as much as possible. But I think there's a better way than the direction that we're going. And as a part of that, I've spent the last year really like interrogating what we do over here in terms of putting information out there. I mean, right now it's just like there are all these giant pipes, coming into this one well, and there's so much being flooded in right now that it can be really overwhelming. So I've interrogated that over the last year, and we're making some changes. We started as education, like I mentioned in the beginning, and I really want to get back to that. So the first thing we did was we entirely overhauled our blog. All the old articles, all of those things. Now, if you go on the website, you click the resources tab, and you're going to get a big list of categories, topics. If you click on one of those topics, it takes you to a landing page where we've already curated things in terms of their format. Like, here are all our podcasts on strength. Here's all our articles. Here's all our videos. And then here are our best of. Here are the ones that have been popular and we think are really valuable. And then some of those go into little subtopics once you're on the landing page. You can also go to the entire blog now. This used to not be a thing, and it blows my mind that we didn't do this. But now if you go to the entire archive, when you click on the resources tab, there's a sorter there that we've built that can sort via format. So if you want podcast, article, or video, and then via general topic and more specific topic. So you should be able to find a number of resources on our blog for just about any topic on getting better at climbing. That was step one, like give people a place to start their exploration. And then we're making a bunch of changes in the podcast that, and I want to talk through some of these with you because I don't have them fully figured out yet. But number one, we want more questions. I would love for people to ask questions, suggest topics that aren't being heard, partly because I'm not listening to as many climbing podcasts as I used to. There's just too much of it. And I'm using a lot of my podcast time either learning about a specific topic that's going to help me become a better coach or entertainment. And so I end up not listening to a lot of the other podcasts about climbing. So I don't know what's not being talked about a lot of the time. So everybody out there who's listening, if you have questions, suggested topics, let us know. Obviously, our patrons are going to be prioritized. If they have questions, those things are going to go first. But I want to know, what do you want to hear? Obviously, I'm not going to be the person who's like, every other week, I just want to know what you want to hear, and that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the things I'm interested in and, explore the topics that I'm interested in. But if enough people say this would be valuable, I'm going to be interested in it.
Yeah.
So please ask those questions. I think we maybe have had enough ideas that we can keep rolling, and we still do. We have a list a mile long of topics, but I want to make sure that it's valuable for everyone else too. A couple of other things. I've done 1 million long form interviews. There are 1 million podcasts out there doing long form interviews. I just don't want to do them anymore. For two reasons. Number one is I think they're a really inefficient way to learn. You might get a 5-minute clip of someone talking about a topic that's important to you. And if it's entertainment, great. You should go listen to those things. Like I said, there are people doing great long form interviews. I also really like doing them in person. For me, that's a far more valuable thing. And that's harder now that I'm here in Lander with a baby, full-time, stay at home dadding. So I'm not going to be doing as many of those. I am going to sort of translate, or transfer those into a new series that's going to be talking to experts, largely outside of climbing. But like I said, if you guys want to hear from somebody in climbing who's an expert on something, let me know. I want to talk to them. But I want to talk to people outside of climbing and then see if I can translate it to climbing. So I'll have these long form conversations that I can do remotely because they're going to be more education, less about getting to know the person. So there are going to be long form interviews. They're just going to be very different. They'll probably be annotated. I'll probably break the conversation and say, okay, I'm jumping in here. Here's how we can view this as climbers. Here's how it might help us. Here's how it might not, even though it seems like it could. So trying to make those more educational as opposed to entertainment or really like getting to know another human being, which is something I love and I enjoy. And it's sad that I don't get to do it as often, but it just doesn't fit my schedule. So I'm going to have to get rid of those to some degree. If they pop up and it's available for me to sit down with this person, I'll still do those.
Yeah.
Where you come in, what I want to know is like board meetings are going to continue. Obviously I really like this format. I value this time of bouncing ideas around. And also taped tips. That's a relatively new thing. I've played with different ways to do it. Those are going to be short form, kind of focused educational episodes. And you and I have talked a little bit. I'm hoping that we can take some of the audio from your YouTube channel, or whatever else you want to say. I would love to split those tape tips up in you do some, I do some. We could even have the other coaches do some if they're interested in doing it. But that way we get lots of perspectives on learning different things or getting different tips.
Totally. Yeah, I love that idea.
And, I mean, it seems like it's what you're doing on your YouTube to a degree anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so any of the things that don't need a visual could work really well in that short form.
Yeah, I think so. And people have been great on the YouTube and giving feedback, and that is something that like a lot of people have asked for is, can I get a podcast version of this?
Yeah, cool. And then the What, When, How to Train episodes are popular, and I think they're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And can really get you psyched on a trip. And frankly, that's one of the most important parts of getting better at climbing is being psyched and being motivated. So
Yeah.
those are also going to stick around. I'm going to be doing more remix episodes. Maybe they won't be as giant and involved as a lot of the ones I've already done. So some mini remixes will likely happen. And then the other thing that I'm considering, and I would love to know your thoughts on this, is I don't know what I want to call it yet. Maybe sends, something like that. But talking to clients of ours, this could be you talking to one of your clients. I could talk to one of your clients, whatever. Someone who's done one-on-one coaching, someone who's done proven plans with us, someone who's just done an ebook, whatever. Someone who's interacted with what we make in some way. And then the successes they've seen, the challenges they've seen, what they wish was included that wasn't, what they, didn't expect to be helpful but was. Whatever their successes are. I want to celebrate the like normal average climber and how they got there, but in a way that's more globally helpful for everybody.
Yeah.
So I would like to bring on some of our clients to kind of talk through their process, whether it's been one single send or a big season or whatever.
Yeah, I love that idea. I mean, that's one of the big flaws with it's cool hearing from pros, but also, I mean, that's it. They're professional climbers. Like they have all the hours of every day. Like, there are plenty of pros who are like, I don't understand why would you train if it's sunny outside? Like,
Right.
you could be climbing. And it's like, oh, well, I have a job. Like, things like that. And yes, I do think they have value to add, but for so many people, like, it's more inspiring to hear like, oh, this is how you manage to balance everything. And like, and balance everything isn't even just time. It's just like, oh, this is how you balanced. You have a family. You also have a job you care about. You have climbing.
Right.
How did you balance that emotionally? How did you like change your priorities throughout the year? Like, because I know people who are just like, oh, like during this time of the year, work's really busy. And so I'm going to literally just like put my, like, do the type of training that is the least mentally intensive that I know will just set me up so I can, when I have the time, I have the mental space, I can do well. And that I think is super valuable. And that's something I don't think we hear enough of.
Yeah, I agree completely. I like this better than the, Instagram post client spotlight sort of a thing, because the thing that makes these clients, I want to say average, but that's not really what these people are. That make these, people with lives outside of climbing so interesting is all these little things that add up to make it difficult, frankly, to train for climbing unless they
Yes.
manage it in a really specific way. And I want to know about all of those things, not just this person has a full-time job and also sent their hardest route. Well, maybe their full-time job is remote and, it's very easy for them to live in a van, in Rifle or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard one recently, someone, they were like, oh, this person only climbs outside 10 days a season and they climbed this very, very hard climb. It's like, well, I know that person and they climbed outside 250 plus days a year for over a decade. And it's like, yes, now
Right.
their schedule is very different, but it's like,
Right.
we need that piece of information. Like, you know,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the big ad this year are those types of episodes where
like
we
that.
get to talk to people in different situations, different perspectives, and try to pull from those scenarios what it is that we could all do. And, not every one of those is going to be good for every person.
Totally.
I think that's a key to remember here in all of this is that not every podcast episode or YouTube video is going to apply to you. We're still going to be cherry picking. I'm trying to make it valuable, but not everything's going to be valuable for every person.
Yeah.
Last thing I'll say here, I don't want to bore people with the changes that are coming. They're interesting to me because I've been thinking about them for a long time, but I know they're not super interesting to everyone else. But just as a quick heads up, here's how you can better engage if you want to better learn from these things, are sort of how the feeds and episodes are going to look different going forward. If you follow Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard, their podcast releases daily almost, and every day of the week is a different type of episode with a different image and a different format, and that's what this feed is going to become essentially. Not daily, not by any means is it going to be daily. It will probably still only be 2 or 3 episodes a month. Patrons will continue to get 2 bonus episodes minimum every month. And the way it's going to be is the type of episode, the series is going to be in all caps. That's going to be the first thing you see. Board meeting, Well How to Train, Tape Tips, Remix, Expert, whatever the new series are going to be called. That's the first thing you'll see. Then the guest and the topic and all of that. But then once you're in it, we're going to start using chapters and clickable timestamps. I haven't used them before because not every podcast app supports them. I think I've found a way to do them that every podcast app will support.
Nice.
It's a little more work, but I know that Spotify, for instance, you'll be able to click in your show notes for the different pieces, the different chapters. Apple, it won't be clickable in the show notes. You'll have to scroll up, swipe up from the show notes, and that'll give you the chapters. And then I think you use Pocket Casts.
Podcast, yeah.
Or
wait,
what do you
called?
use? Pocket Cast, I think.
Sorry, I'm unprepared here. Overcast.
Overcast. You use Overcast.
Yeah.
Well, I think in Pocket Cast, you get a tab that says chapter that you can click. And then in yours, there's also a chapter and you can click in the show notes.
Yeah.
So some combination of those things, whether you have a dedicated chapters tab that you swipe to or click to, or you can click right there in the show notes. And I'm going to try to add those clickable timestamps to all of the things that make sense. Like for board meetings, when we do top 5 lists or when we're discussing different things, you'll get those chapters. That way it's just easier to go back to. Transcripts are always available. A lot of the old episodes have full transcripts in the blog post. If it's a newer episode, it may not. So if you want a transcript, hit me up. We can get you a transcript. But look on the blog post first, because hundreds of the old episodes are already there. And then I'll also try to include in those, in the blog posts for each episode, as well as in the show notes, here are other episodes or other resources or our resource landing page that makes sense for you to go to start exploring this topic further. Whether it's a remix episode, an expert episode, a board meeting about a specific topic, there are going to be other articles, videos, podcasts that we've done that sort of branch off of that topic. So I'm going to be trying to put all of those in there. Essentially, I'm trying to turn it into what I wish I had when I was doing remix episodes. Like if I found a podcast that said, oh, here are all these other episodes and articles and research papers and all this other stuff you can look at, that's what I want. So that's what we're going to try to turn all of these podcast episodes in, starting now and going forward, just to make them more useful for everybody.
Nice. Yeah, I really like that.
It might be a fool's errand. I might just be spending a lot of extra time for no reason, but it's the thing I want us to be. Like I want, this is all about educating climbers and making people better climbers. And, I steered away from talking to the pros a long time ago because I just don't think it's a super effective, efficient way to learn. That doesn't mean it's not valuable. Mm-hmm. And you should, if you're excited to go listen to the pros, you should go listen to the pros because they're, I think The Struggle does a great job of breaking down different aspects of the way pros are approaching climbing. Mm-hmm. And I think, The Nugget does amazing long form interviews where they are regularly talking about training. And then the Enormocast does great history and stories from pro climbers. So absolutely go listen to those if that's the way you want to go. Over here, I think I want to lean more toward the education side of things.
I like that.
All right. I think that's all I've got then. We just keep getting inundated with more and more information. That's not going to slow down. It's probably just going to speed up. So it's on us to figure out better ways to retain the things we want, filter out the things we don't, and apply the things we want to our climbing, to our lives, all of this. And I hope that we can be helpful in that pursuit for everybody.
Yeah.
All right. You guys know where to find us, powercompanyclimbing.com, where we've got courses, 1 million blog posts and podcast episodes, and all sorts of training plans for different levels of climber, different trips you might be taking. We've got training plans focused on different areas. And like I said, check out that resource tab. You can go down some rabbit holes learning about all sorts of things, and you can learn, grow, and excel.
You don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time, power, this time to build, power, this time to build, power, this time to build, power. This time to build 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 power. This time to build. 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 This time to build.